So let's take a look at the options for the parser. I'm going to click Change here. And you see we have several options. Right now we have CSV parser checked, but we can also use a common syndication parser, which is RSS and Atom formats. We can also pull in from OPML files, which is a markup language for outlines, or a sitemap parser, which will pull in from an XML sitemap feed. Now, all of these can be really useful in other use cases. For example, if we wanted to create a set of pages from a sitemap from an existing site and just create the bare bones structure of all of those pages, we could do that using this importer. If we wanted to import blog entries from an RSS feed from another site in order to pull it over to our Drupal site, we can do that using this setting. But we're going to be importing from CSV, so we'll leave that checked. And since that's checked, we have some additional settings here for CSV parser. Let's click on the settings next to that. So we have our default delimiter, and this is the character that separates the individual pieces of content for each record. You would think CSV means that it will always be a comma, but not necessarily. It can also be a semicolon or a tab, at least for these settings here. And if our CSV file doesn't have any headings, we wanted to check this. If we look at our CSV file, I'm going to go over to our text file so we can look at it directly. This list of column titles here is our header. And so we want to make sure to skip this when doing the import. If, however, this didn't exist, by default, the first entry would be skipped because it would be assumed that it would be the headers. So for situations like that, we would want to make sure to check this no headings option. Okay, now let's go to processor. And let's take a look at what processors we have to choose from here. So we have node processor, taxonomy term processor, and user processor. So this just allows us to import into 3 different entity types. In this case, we're creating nodes, so we'll keep this node processor checked. And because this is checked, we have some settings here for a node processor. Let's click on those. Our first setting here is update existing nodes. So this is what happens when we run this importer multiple times. Are we going to update existing nodes? Are we going to skip the process of updating them? This can be helpful if, for example, we have some preliminary content for our nodes initially that we want to import when going through the site building process. But then later on, as our contributors flesh out the content, we want to re-import that content, but still update any content that gets changed from one version to the next. So right now the option is selected to replace existing nodes, which ideally means that the original nodes will be deleted and some new nodes will be imported. We can also choose to not update existing nodes and just import the new nodes that might be part of the CSV. So for example, if we added some additional rows there, or we can update existing nodes. So this is more along the lines of what we would need if we had the scenario I just explained, where we have some content that gets updated periodically during the site building process. We're going to go ahead and keep replace existing nodes. We're not going to go through any processes to update nodes. And whenever we need to roll back an import, which we're going to do because our import isn't going to work perfectly the first time, then we're going to do so using the rollback function of the feeds module. This next option is skip hash check. And the idea here is that every time a piece of content is imported, a hash is created, which is unique for every import. And the hash will be the same as long as the content of all of the fields that we're importing stays the same. If something changes, then the hash will be unique, and so that would trigger an update if we have update existing nodes checked. Now, if we skip the hash check, what that means is that every node will go through the update process even if the hash matches up. Now, this is something that you would do if, for some reason, some of the data that you were importing wasn't triggering a change in the hash, even though you had changed the content in the import data file. In this case, because we're not doing any updating, we can skip that. The text format sets the input format for the body field if we're importing a body field. Now, because we're importing content that includes some HTML, we want to make sure to allow that in our text formatter. So I'm going to select filtered HTML instead of plain text. For our content type, we're going to be importing products first. So we want to select product here. I'm going to scroll down. For author, if we had another default contributor that we wanted to set here, we might want to change this, but for now we're going to leave it at the current anonymous. Later on in this series, we're going to assign authors manually to every piece of content where the author matters. This authorize option checks to make sure that the author that's associated with this piece of content that's being imported, so for each piece of content this will be checked, it checks to make sure that that author has the permission to create the content. If they don't, it will throw an error saying that it doesn't have permission and the import for at least that piece of content was unsuccessful. And you'll see us run into this a little bit later on. For the expire node setting, we might want to do this if we were creating an aggregator of news and we don't want the news to stay on our site forever. In this case, this is real content, so we're going to leave this at never. And because we've made some changes, I'm going to click Save.